Hello and welcome back to another Doctor Who Big Finish video. In today's Doctor Who Big Finish video, I'll be doing my Doctor Who main range for 2019. Yes, I'm finally getting round to doing it. Better late than never, I guess. So I have done this video for previous years. I've done it for 2017 and 2018. I'll leave a little card thing there, and of course a link in the description below to those videos, and of course my Big Finish review playlist if you want to check out any other Big Finish content that I've done. So the way this video is going to work is I'm going to cover all 13 releases from the 2019 main range catalogue, from Devil in the Mist to Blood on Santa's Claw, going from my least favourite to my favourite. It's that simple. So 2019 was a big year for Big Finish. Obviously it was the 20th anniversary of them producing Doctor Who content, and obviously the main range is where it all started. And 2019's main range in terms of TARDIS teams was quite exciting, because one thing that what I always want from the main range is them to do something a little bit different, use different TARDIS teams. In 2019 we had Chameleon join the TARDIS. We had sort of Mags join the TARDIS as well, and we had the return of Perry after a 5-year absence, and the 5th Doctor got a new companion. So 2019 did offer some very fresh and new exciting ideas. So without further ado, let's kickstart this overview. Right, so kicking off this list of my least favourite main range story for 2019, and that is The Moons of Volpana, a 7th Doctor and Mags story. Now if you followed my Big Finish main range overview videos, then this might be no surprise, because the 7th Doctor stuff normally is towards the bottom end of this list. Now this is not because I dislike the 7th Doctor personally, because I love season 25 and I absolutely adore season 26. It just seems to be over sort of the recent years in terms of the main range, the 7th Doctor stuff for me is just the weaker stuff. And I was quite excited for the Mags trilogy because it was something different, it was something fresh. Now, how's the 7th Doctor going to deal with Mags and becoming a full-time companion? Sadly, it turned out to be the sort of weaker trilogy of 2019. So the Moonsville Partner, because the Mags trilogy for me was just very inconsistent, because obviously the whole story, the whole sort of trilogy is built of sort of Mag sort of embracing the inner wolf, and obviously there is such thing as sort of character conflict in terms of, you know, does she want to sort of embrace her Volpana nature, the sort of werewolf side, or does she want to get rid of it? But it seems between the three stories it's just very inconsistent. It doesn't feel like the writers communicated with how Mags is going to progress throughout the trilogy. But the Moons of Volpana should be a real good story for Mags, because it sees, you know, Mags go back to Volpana, her home planet, before she was sort of born. You know, it's very early in sort of Volpana history, and it's the Golden Millennium. So we learn of the sort of different houses on the planet of Volpana, sort of 4 different wolf packs. I mean, as well, I'd say at the start of the story, you know, the scene between Mags and the Doctor and the TARDIS, the sound design seemed a little bit ropey in my opinion. It seemed a little bit amateurish. It doesn't seem quite like the usual standard Big Finish has, and McCoy in that seems a little bit, you know, seems a little bit off in my personal opinion, personally. But as the story itself, you know, I like that it's trying to explore Volpana and sort of give more context to Mags and the Volpanans as a species. You know, I think the early half of the story is where it's at, you know, is where I enjoy the story the most. But as the story progresses, it just becomes very predictable. You know, the last episode I believe is like 34 minutes, and it just seems to be a bit of a drag. Personally, I kind of struggled listening to this one. So yeah, Moons of Volpana had great potential, but it just seems a little bit inconsistent with sort of the events that happened prior in the Monsters of Gokarov. So I'm going to give Moons of Volpana, I'm going to give it maybe a 4 or 5 out of 10. It's okay, but it's a little bit of a struggle for me personally to listen to this one. It's not one I'm going to go back and visit in a hurry. Next up we have the Monsters of Gokarov at 12th place. Now, I did quite enjoy listening to this one when I was listening to it, but when I was writing my review, that's when I noticed the flaws of it. Now, this story is the opening for the Mags trilogy, and it does everything what a story should do. It reintroduces us to Mags, where she is as a character, where she's been since the greatest show in the galaxy. And this story, to me, has all the hallmarks of being a really good 7th Doctor story. You know, the title from itself, you know, the Monsters of Gokarov, it just seems like a very 7th Doctor title, doesn't it? But the story, you know, the characters are very Robert Holmes-esque, you know, which I love, you know, because everybody loves Robert Holmes stories. You know, the story sort of reminds me of a mixture of sort of Brain and Morbius, of these sort of weird experiments on these monster characters, and sort of a Carnival of Monsters vibe with this sort of carnival showing up. You know, it has some great ideas within it, but the story sort of falls apart, you know, in its sense that it just, when I was looking back on it, I just didn't know where I stood with the actual story itself. You know, I feel like this story for me personally, it would have worked better as a 3-parter, which, you know, doesn't seem out of place for the 7th Doctor era, because, you know, most of his era is 3-parters. So I feel like this story would have worked better as a 3-parter. You know, I love that the 7th Doctor's a bit more melancholy, you know, he's a bit more in the shadows, letting things play out as they go along. which I really do like. You know, because I love all the ideas what this story is trying to do. You know, this village terrorised by monsters in the forest, and you know, these weird experiments going on in a castle. You know, it does seem, you know, very good traditional classic Doctor Who. It's just a shame that the ideas just never quite gel together, and they just seem to conflict each other, which is a real shame. And this sort of starts the arc of, you know, Mags wanting to get rid of the inner wolf within the inner Volpana nature. But like I said, throughout the trilogy, it's just very inconsistent. One minute she wants to, you know, get rid of it, the other she wants to embrace it, the next she wants to get rid of it. It doesn't seem like a character conflict. It just seems like the writers just haven't had any communication about it, really. So it's just a bit of a shame. But I will say I did quite enjoy it. I feel like I enjoyed it when I was listening to it, but it was when I come to reflect on the actual story itself, when I came to review it, that's when the story just didn't seem to work for me. Like, it has all the hallmarks of being a great story. It's just the ideas never quite gelled together to form a really solid story. So I'm going to give The Monsters of Gokarov a 6 out of 10. At 11th place we have An Alien Werewolf in London, a bit of a play on an American werewolf in London. Now this is written by Alan Barnes, and this is the last story he script edited for the main range. And this story, you know, it's the last story in the Mags trilogy. This story was basically for Mags to meet Ace again, and I'll be honest, Mags doesn't really meet Ace. You know, for most of the story they might have just one moment together, but the rest they're kind of separate doing their own things, which is a bit of a shame, really. Now this story does feel like What If Doctor Who carried on in the 90s. You know, this is set in the 90s, so it does have that feel of What If Doctor Who did continue. Now this story on paper seems like a really good 7th Doctor story. You know, 7th Doctor versus vampires, you know, it just seems like, you know, the ideal 7th Doctor story, doesn't it? You know, this sort of more darker 7th Doctor going up against the vampires. You know, it seems wonderful, seems like a really good idea. Sadly, that's not the case. You know, I think that this story has great moments. You know, building up to the vampire reveal is amazing. I absolutely love it. You know, it has some great moments when sort of Mags is sort of with this sort of bat creature, you know, her sort of relating to this sort of giant bat creature, what features within it. So the real crime for this story is that it kind of wastes the whole vampire subplot. It tends to focus on this Australian vampire, I think, who's in this sort of soap drama. So basically Alan Barnes is sort of riffing off Neighbours, and basically, yeah, and it just doesn't really work in that sense, but it kind of, it has potential to be a great 7th Doctor story. You know, 7th Doctor and vampires, you know, and Ace and Mags going on a mission, you know, to uncover it all, but it just seems to waste that, and I feel like that's a real shame of it, because it just tends to focus on it, and I feel like Alan Barnes is trying to go too comedic with this story, and it doesn't quite work for me. Obviously Alan Barnes did the comic adaptations in 2019, and obviously if you've listened to those, they're very wacky and out there stories, and I feel like Alan Barnes is trying to do that for the 7th Doctor, and for the tone of, you know, for the story, what he's trying to tell, it just doesn't work, and it just seems tonally all over the place. And I think that's what kind of lets it down. Like, I did enjoy the sort of reveal of the vampires. I think that's a really good strong half of the story. It's just when it starts to focus more on the Australian soap opera drama thing, it just kind of loses me, and I think that's a real shame. You know, the music is alright. Overall, I'm going to give An Alien Werewolf in London a 6.5 out of 10. It's okay. So at number 10, we have an anthology release, Blood on Santa's Claw. Yes, December's anthology release. This is just a lot of fun, and I feel like this is going to be a story, sort of set of stories I will revisit in December alongside with Chimes of Midnight. It does seem like a nice fun little release, and it was quite nice that Big Finish did a bit of a Christmas release, so I thought that was really cool of them to do that. You know, we see the 6th Doctor and Perry and sort of her boyfriend Joe within it. The stories are quite fun. They're quite fun. You know, there's quite a bleak story in there with sort of The Baby Awakens, which is about sort of designer babies, whether, you know, it would work, you know, how to sort of program it. It's all very interesting idea and quite grim, but there's a whole institute sort of dealing with that, and it's quite a sinister purpose why they do that. It's a very interesting, you know, Blood on Santa's Claw, you know, with sort of the 6th Doctor pretending to be Father Christmas, is a lot of fun with these sort of great sort of Shakespearean sort of animal creatures, which is great fun little listen. I think the problem I have with this release personally is it has a bit of a twist within it, and the twist to me is a little bit predictable in the sense that the twist had already been done in a 6th Doctor release, again, in 2018, called Lore of a Nomad. If you've listened to Lore of a Nomad, you might know exactly what twist I'm on about within it, because this release does exactly the same, and which is a bit of a shame. Again, I think that's what lets this release down, is the whole sort of twist in this release has been done before, and again, it's a 6th Doctor story, you know, and practically a year in between Lore of a Nomad and this, and it just, yeah. that's a bit of a shame. I think that's my only real criticism for this release. Other than that, it's quite an enjoyable set of 4 little short stories. So I'm going to give Blood and Santa's Claw a 7 out of 10. At number 9, we have the second Mark release, which is Interstitial and Feast of Fear. So we have a double whammy. So this is basically 2 1-hour stories. So Interstitial, obviously we've got the Nerva Beacon on there, even though it's not referenced in the story. It's quite an interesting story, and I re-listened to this one recently because I'm going to be reviewing the Mark stories over the next couple of weeks. So I thought I'd re-listen to this, and I have to say I definitely enjoyed it more on re-listen, because I think it's got quite an interesting idea, because the Doctor and TARDIS crew investigate this sort of time disruption that these 2 scientists are creating, this chronon bomb, this sort of weapon what sort of can use time against their enemies, which is quite an interesting idea. And the Professor wants to have, use one of the chronon energies, sort of this thing called interstitial time, and use it to become this sort of godlike creature, to keep evolving and become the best a human could be. So we get a sort of, this sort of interesting idea, because the way the story split, we get the great character moments between the Doctor and Mark, exploring that dynamic, because obviously in Tartarus, which I'll explain later on in the list, the Doctor's quite reluctant to let Mark join the TARDIS crew, because obviously he's dealing with the loss of Adric. But this sort of sees that dynamic sort of flourish, and sort of the 5th Doctor sort of be amused by Mark, because Mark is from, ancient Rome, and he's never been on a spaceship, so the idea of a sliding door excites him. Just seeing that sort of wandering Mark is great, and he just loves that. While sort of Tegan and Nyssa are trying to get to the bottom of the whole sort of time disruption, which is very interesting, because obviously it's a bit sort of Aquitaine-esque with the way that story's structured in a way, which is very cool. And I would say that it's quite good. It is a very good little hour-long story. It's got some great sort of resolution to it. It's quite an interesting story, actually. I did enjoy it. It's quite full of quite a scientific, jargon. So if you can get past that, I'm sure you'll enjoy it, because it is quite a fun story. So I'll give Interstitial a 6 out of 10. It is quite an enjoyable story, personally. So then we have the Feast of Fear, which is probably the highlight of this release for me. Nyssa gets a lot of great things to do, because obviously she's playing this sort of evil ringmaster, being sort of possessed by, being taken control by this sort of evil squid creature, which I can't remember the name of. But it's very interesting, because it's set in the sort of Irish famine, and people want to join, people want entertainment, and they want to sort of get out of the misery of sort of starvation, and sort of the whole idea of them sort of using, this circus using emotions and using that to kill them is a very cool idea. Peter Davison gets some quite exciting things to do, because he's trying to block out the sort of psychic squid vampires sort of mind things. He's trying to get into his mind and access that and make him become part of the sort of feast, and obviously part of the actual circus itself. So this is a great story for Tegan and Mark, because they're very much trying to get their friends back, and it's just quite a good story. It does feel very sort of new Series-S in a way. But yeah, I did enjoy that one. Feast of Fear, I would say, is an 8 out of 10. I feel like it gives Nyssa and Sarah Sutton something different to do, much like Eternal Summer and I guess Dalek Soul. She gets to do some different stuff in that, so it's great to see sort of Sarah Sutton really test her acting ability within it, and the whole idea of this sort of psychic vampire squid's quite interesting, with the whole sort of Spay wife. That's quite an interesting idea. Very creepy sound design for that as well. So yeah, very good. And obviously this was released in Halloween time, and it's got some quite grim imagery, especially when the sort of husks of the villagers have just been left. Next up we have Harry Houdini's War, the last story in the 6th Doctor and Perry trilogy for 2019. Now, Harry Houdini, one of the most referenced people in the Doctor universe. I mean, just look at his TARDIS wiki page. There's quite a load of references. Practically in every story there's a reference to Houdini. I think recently there was one in, Nikola Tesla's Night of Terrors. I think there was a reference to Harry Houdini in that. Now, obviously this is written by Steve Lyons. Now, Steve Lyons is a very good writer, so you're going to get a very good, solid story within this. And I believe that this is a little precursor to Smoke and Mirrors, one of the Destiny of the Doctor audios. Now, you don't need to listen to that to enjoy this story, but this story is a lot of fun. And in a way, the cover does look like an anthology, but it is one big story. Now, there is something quite interesting about this story in terms of the theme music. Now, the theme music is the Trial of a Time Lord theme tune, the season 23 theme, and the rest of the trilogy is obviously the standard sort of Peter Howell arrangement of the theme, really. So you might be wondering, well, why are you bringing that up? Because that becomes a bit of a plot detail why that theme tune is used. The 6th Doctor's acting a little bit out of character within this release, which gives Colin Baker something a little bit different to do. And obviously there's a great sort of twist towards the end of the story involving why it is the sort of season 23 theme, which is very cool. We get Perry getting some great moments within this story, especially with Harry Houdini, especially when sort of start of episode 2 when they're sort of escaping German soldiers, which is great. Harry Houdini is just a really likeable character, and sort of explains why he was a master of escapology. It explains all that, which is quite an interesting take on it. But yeah, I did enjoy this one. I feel like it's a very enjoyable one. It's got some great action moments within it, and it's just a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun listening to this one. It is a wonderful story, and the twist is very cool. The twist is definitely one of the standout moments of this story. So I'm going to give Harry Houdini's War an 8 out of 10. It's a very good, solid story by Steve Lyons. Next we have Devil in the Mist, the first story in the Chameleon trilogy. Now, I had a lot of fun listening to this one. This one just feel like a great continuation from the actual TV show itself. Tegan is very unsure on Chameleon. She doesn't trust him, and that's a theme very much carried throughout the whole Chameleon trilogy. It does feel very much like a great continuation for this, and the story by Cavan Scott. Cavan Scott's a great writer, one of my favourites of the Big Finish catalogue. He wrote Project Twilight, The Eternal Battle, The Many Deaths of Joe Grant. Amazing stories. So I was very excited about this, and it does feel like a great opening for this. The Doctor and crew will land on this sort of prison ship, the warlord who can transform himself into mist, and obviously the ship and the ship crash lands, and obviously the Fifth Doctor has got a bit of a habit of crash landing ships, and obviously this planet they arrive on is full of mist, so there is full of danger and peril within the story. So I really do like that. There is always a sense of danger. Turlo gets some great moments because he has to hide the Doctor's injuries from Tegan, so Tegan doesn't panic, because it's a great story for that, because the Fifth Doctor within this is amazing. This story, the Fifth Doctor could regenerate at any time. This story feels like the Fifth Doctor could literally regenerate into Colin Baker at any second. There is so much danger, the amount of danger the Fifth Doctor and sort of injuries the Fifth Doctor has within this story, you do feel like, wow, the Fifth Doctor could literally die within this story. It is amazing. Chameleon is really well utilised. This story really shows the potential Chameleon has, but obviously he was limited by the prop, and this story is a really good story for Chameleon. So I'm going to give The Devil in the Mist a 8 out of 10 as well. So next up we have the second Chameleon release, which is Black Thursday and Power Game. Now Power Game is a very good story for Chameleon. It is a very interesting story. It's a story what throws you straight into the action, and it's a story what just never stops, because it's basically about this mining disaster, and it's basically as soon as the Doctor and crew just get thrown in that mining disaster, trying to rescue people, trying to get people out of the mine. And it's a very good story for Chameleon, because Chameleon learns of emotion in the sense that he learns of grief and loss and pain that has, and sort of how that sort of stronger emotions can sort of inflict him. That he sort of gets taken over by one of the villagers' sort of mindsets of being sort of vengeful of one of the characters within it. So it's very interesting for Chameleon to sort of learn of human emotions and understand why humans feel a certain way when something happens. So it's a very good story for that. Every character within this gets utilised very well, and I think towards the end of the story it does become very much sort of a family drama piece. It does become this sort of whole sort of about a family and the loss of that impact that has on a mother character, and the whole sort of reveal of it, because there is a twist involving one of the characters within it, which is very cool and is very interesting within the actual story. So I feel like this story, I feel like this story has potential to be a four-parter, and I think that's a great compliment, because I feel like there's so many good ideas within it I would have liked to have seen, because this story is just non-stop. It's just full of action and just a great story for Chameleon, and it is a really great release for that. So as well, the ending does feel very new series in the way it sort of concludes itself, and this sort of story really just sort of start to begin the theme of, is Chameleon a liability? Should he be on the TARDIS? So the second story within this release is Power Game, and it is the perfect story you wanted after Black Thursday, because Black Thursday is a very tragic story, and Power Game is just exactly what you need. It is a lot of fun, and it is such a great story because it reminds me of an early Big Finish. It's very experimental. The format is wonderful, that you've got people watching this game called Power Game, and it's basically the Crystal Maze, and people collect these sort of power gems, which has a great twist within sort of part 2 of the release. So we basically see Tegan playing these games, and obviously the audience members, basically us, sort of doing commentary on the games, which is very cool, and we see the games play out live. So we keep cutting back to that, and you wonder, where is Chameleon? We have a great twist involving Chameleon. It's just a lot of fun, and I think that's why I love it, because it's something incredibly fresh. The format's very exciting. It's something very different, and I think that's why I like it, because it just reminds me of one of the 1 to 50 stories, and it's just, I had a lot of fun, and it's kind of creepy seeing Tegan being happy. Even though that's not meant to be creepy, it's just weird seeing Tegan happy, because normally she's sort of complaining. So this is a really good story. I just love it, and it obviously sets up Chameleon Empire, because we see the Doctor going, right, we're going to go back to Chameleon's home planet. So this is a very good story. I really did enjoy Power Game, and it's definitely one of the standouts from this year in terms of the stories. It's just a lot of fun, and I had a lot of fun with it. So yeah, I'm going to give Power Game and Black Thursday a well-deserved 8.5 out of 10. Next up, we have The Memories of a Tyrant. Now, this is a really good story. This is the first story in the 6th Doctor and Perry trilogy, and this is a great opening for this trilogy, if I do say so myself, because the whole idea of this sort of memory farm, this idea of this sort of farm, what can collect your memories, and you can sort of discover memories what you don't remember. And the whole idea of this sort of investigation of trying to undercover this sort of character called Gaius Monroe, who is supposedly this evil tyrant, and they're trying to sort of get him to sort of remember stuff so they could sort of convict him of being this war criminal, which is a very interesting idea. And obviously, can you imprison somebody if they can't remember doing the crime? So the whole theme is that. So it's a very good sort of detective story, and there's obviously sabotage within there. So it's a very sort of traditional, fun Doctor Who within it, and it's just a really good idea within it. And it's a great story for Perry, because obviously it explores more of her sort of dad character, sort of Howard, within it, which is great, and her sort of reliving some sort of memories from her childhood. It's just a really good story, but I think the thing what lets this story down in a way is it's kind of left ambiguous whether Gaius Monroe was this sort of war tyrant character, or was he this sort of this innocent character who doesn't remember. And obviously there's a great twist with it involving the Doctor within this, which I'm not going to spoil because it's one of the big sort of jaw-dropping moments within the story itself, which is fantastic. So yeah, Memories of a Tyrant I think is a really good story. It's a really good sort of, got some great sort of moral and ethical ideas within it what are explored, and I think that's one of the strongest things about the story is the concept. Now, I did do a full review on it, so if you want to know my full thoughts on it, because it is a really good story and I just love the concept of it. So again, I'm going to give this story an 8.5 out of 10. So next up we have the final story in the Chameleon trilogy, which is the Chameleon Empire. This is a brilliant story by Jonathan Morris. This is very much a continuity filler. It explains why Chameleon was just shoved in a cupboard, and it sort of leads into the 5 Doctors and why the 5th Doctor got a new TARDIS console. This story has some great revelations for Chameleon, and it just, when you listen to it, you're like, that makes perfect sense, why that happened, why Chameleon was shoved in a cupboard. Because it's very much Chameleon's story. This is very good for Chameleon, because Chameleon very much acts as a storyteller. He's explaining the Camille's, his species, and this sort of entity called Chaos. And John Coltrane does a fantastic job, and Chaos is a superb villain. It is a really good one. And this story, despite only having a very small cast, it only has sort of 5 people within it, sort of the Doctor, Tegan, Turlough, Chameleon, and sort of alternative chameleons played by Christopher Naylor. It just has so much going on. It has so much life and colour within it, despite having a small cast member, and it just makes it feel very intimate. And it's just an amazing story. I absolutely loved listening to this one. It's amazing. Amazing. It has some great ideas as well. The whole idea of sort of explaining the sort of Chameleon's war they had, which is great. Sort of this sort of being this sort of chess in a way, like this sort of whole sort of chessboard with sort of the Chameleon sort of almost sort of doing a dance around it to sort of represent sort of a battle and how they sort of taken over sort of other planets. So, and I think that's the thing what's really struck in my mind, that whole idea of sort of the Chameleons, sort of the robots just doing this sort of weird dance and taking over and fighting each other. It's just a great way of sort of showing off a war, and quite an interesting and quite creative way. And I think that this story, it's very much a continuity film. If you like continuity being explained and explained why sort of things happen within the actual show, then this is a great story, and I really did enjoy listening to this one. So I'm going to give this one a 9 out of 10. It's a really good story, and a really good story for Chameleon, and a great way to wrap up this trilogy. So we've reached the top 3. So what is at number 3? We have Emissary of the Daleks. Yes, written by Andrew Smith. Now, this story was basically commissioned because Big Finish wanted another sort of a summer blockbuster audio, because obviously last time they had Hour of the Cybermen by Andrew Smith, which is a very highly regarded release, and I myself love that story. So Andrew Smith wanted to take his, tackle the Daleks, and he did a brilliant job. This is the Daleks at their most ruthless and it is just amazing. The Supreme Dalek, I've just got to talk about the Supreme Dalek because he's amazing within it. It's utterly brilliant. You know, but when people are dying, you can just tell that he's delighting and just revels in it. He just, very much like the Planet Supreme Dalek, obviously he's on the cover there, as you can see. But, you know, he doesn't have, you know, doesn't like fail. You know, the way he manipulates a character called, you know, sort of Carmen Rager is brilliant. It's just how he just sort of has, you know, her wrapped around his plunger. It's amazing. It's just a really good story for a Supreme Dalek. But I will say the sound design seems a little bit odd for the Daleks. You know, the way they have this sort of odd sound design. If you listen to it, you might understand what I mean, but there's a bit of an odd sound design within the Daleks, but it is a really good story. And obviously the Sixth Doctor has a plethora of Dalek releases, from Order of the Daleks to Masters of Earth, which is probably my favourite Sixth Doctor Dalek story, you know, Brotherhood of the Daleks, you know, Jubilee. There's so many Sixth Doctor Dalek stories, so for Andrew Smith to sort of, you know, create another Dalek story, what, you know, deserves to be in that sort of pantheon of one of Big Finish's best Dalek stories. It's really good. You know, the whole world building is great. You know, the whole society Andrew Smith has built within it is great. It's amazing. You know, the whole idea of these truth speakers, you know, that they sort of are trying to maintain the history of their planet, so when the Daleks do eventually leave, you know, it is a crime if you remember the time before the Daleks arrive. So that's a really interesting way how the Daleks, you know, have just manipulated this sort of whole world, you know, because it's a very grim and bleak story, and it does feel very sort of 1960s Dalek-esque, you know, and it's just amazing. And Colin Baker really does shine within it. Perry gets some great moments with the Resistance. You know, the Daleks are just at their absolute ruthless and at their just, it's just an amazing story. I really did enjoy Emissary of the Daleks. It is a fantastic release. You know, it's just a really good story, and I do recommend it. So I'm going to give this story a 9 out of 10 as well. So at number 2 we have Tartarus by David Llewellyn, the first story in the Mark series of adventures. Now this is a wonderful little precursor. Now the wonderful thing about the Mark trilogy, well, the Mark sort of series of adventures, is that it does feel like a mini series of adventures, and this story sort of foreshadows the events in Warzone and Conversion, because you have the sort of hint of Cybermen and the Fifth Doctor sort of still coming to terms with the loss of Adric, you know, and him wanting to meet Cicero and be a fanboy, you know, to sort of escape the horror of what just happened with Adric. You know, he wants to be happy, you know, and this is like, well, let him be happy, you know, let him have this moment, because obviously this release in a way is sort of a crossover and sort of a cross promotion between another Big Finish sort of original series in the form of Cicero, you know, with Samuel Bennett playing Cicero, which is great. But this story I absolutely love this story, and I will be doing a full review on it, because it has a sort of First Doctor feel to it. It has that sort of Keys and Marinus sort of going on a quest, because obviously in the latter half of the story, you know, they have to find these 3 keys to sort of escape the domain of Tartarus, which is amazing, and there's a great little twist involving Tartarus, and obviously this story really does let Mark shine, and why Mark is sort of a chosen character, why he's born to lead, and why is he going to be part of this sort of alien sort of thing, which I'm not going to spoil because I nearly spoiled it then, you know. And the whole sort of idea, you know, is a great sort of scope within it. You know, it sort of plays with sort of Jason and the Argonaut sort of thing, with creatures from that, you know, the giant bronze robot, and you know, there are so many good themes explored within this, and I really did enjoy it, and it's a great sort of story to introduce Mark and see how he works, and obviously it leads to a wonderful series of adventures. So Tartarus I really did enjoy. I think that it's great sort of, it's quite fresh. I found it quite fresh and rejuvenating to listen to, and I just had a lot of fun listening to it, because it is basically the story format is 2 45-minute episodes, so very much like Resurrection of the Daleks when that was broadcast, and I feel like if the story works in that format, actually it does work very well. So yeah, I feel like this is a very good story. You know, it doesn't take time, you know, it just throws you straight into it. You know, you have this lovely party, and then they're soon taken to this other domain, which is very cool, and it obviously explores sort of mythology, and it is really good and fascinating. So I'm going to give Tartarus a well-deserved 9 out of 10 as well. So what could be at number 1? Well, it's obviously Warzone and Conversion, the final story in the sort of Mark 5th Doctor trilogy for 2019. This was an amazing release. This is a story, well, this sort of release should have been told years ago. It's one of those sort of releases where you think, why has this story never been done? You know, the Fifth Doctor really confronting that sort of emotion and the pain and loss of Adric, and dealing with the Cybermen. Obviously the Fifth Doctor in this had spare parts, but they didn't really deal with the theme of loss of Adric, and obviously the whole theme of this story is, you know, is the Fifth Doctor going to lose Mark? Is Mark going to, you know, be taken over? You know, because this story is just, well, this series of adventures are amazing. Warzone is a story what shouldn't be possible on audio, because it's basically this giant fun race, and obviously there's these sort of bands what keep you alive, and it basically, these Salah bands are basically used to sort of test, you know, your pain tolerance. You know, they're sort of adjust. You know, the course is ever changing. You know, it's a species. You know, that when the Cybermen sort of get hinted at, the Fifth Doctor. You know, this is one of Peter Davison's best performances since Kaiser Androzani. This is, you know, the Kaiser Androzani Fifth Doctor being defiant and just trying his best to save his friends because he's just absolutely horrified by Warzone. It is just an amazing story. Obviously, I'm going to do a full review on this in the next coming weeks, but it is just a really good story. The whole sort of idea, the way the Cybermen are slowly starting to build up into this story is amazing. You know, but there's a whole society what doesn't know about Cybermen, yet these people want to be upgraded. You know, they want to be the fastest, the best they can. They want to beat their personal best. So it's a really interesting idea, and that sort of whole take, what Chris Chapman takes the story on, is amazing. And I love Chris Chapman's work. You know, Iron Bright, The Middle. It's just a really inventive story, and a story, you know, the Fifth Doctor just losing it in part 2, that he's going, I'm not losing another companion to the Cybermen, is just great. You know, it's a story what you think should have been told within the TV show, because it is just a great sort of reconfrontation, especially when you get to sort of conversion, when he faces the Cybermen again, which is great. You know, it's very much the Fifth Doctor and Tegan on a mission to save, you know, Mark, you know, to save Mark, which is just creates some great tension. Will he be able to save Mark in time before the Cybermen sort of invade? And obviously the Cyber Leader, you know, recalls the events of Earthshock because he's sort of been re-downloaded into the new Cyber Leader. So it's a really great sort of confrontation, the Fifth Doctor confronting the Cybermen again, and it's just lets Peter Davison really shine. I can't really talk about this, you know, it's just amazing to have David Banks voicing the Cyber Leader again. I just absolutely love it. You know, it's just like he's never left, and just, you know, this release again, it ends on a bit of a cliffhanger as well. You know, the Fifth Doctor just doesn't want to be with his companions because he's just scared of losing them, and that obviously leads to events in like Time Apart and sort of Fin Time and Madquake, really. So it is a really good release, and I definitely think that it's a standout one because it's a story what should have been told within the TV show, and it's finally getting told, and it is an amazing release. So I really do recommend this one. This is an amazing release. So I'm going to give Warzone in Conversion a well-deserved 10 out of 10. So that concludes this video. Hope you have enjoyed it, covering all 13 releases from the main range from 2019. So I'll just quickly talk about the trilogies. I feel like the Max trilogy had potential, but it kind of wasted it, and it seemed very similar to Chameleon, the Chameleon trilogy, in the form of, is Mags a bit of a liability with a sort of werewolf or Vorpan in nature? And I think that's what kind of lets that sort of trilogy down. But it has so many great ideas, but it just never quite fulfills them and has the potential what the scripts act. You know, the stories themselves, they have some great potential, but they never quite reach them. And obviously, the next trilogy I would say I recommend is probably, I'd say, the Chameleon trilogy. The Chameleon trilogy, again, great series of adventures, great exploration of Chameleon, especially Chameleon Empire. Then I would possibly say, I would go for, personally, out of them, out of the next ones, I would go for the Sixth Doctor and Perry trilogy. Great set of 3 stories, great themes within them, you know, wonderful. And obviously my favourite being the Fifth Doctor and Mark adventures, because it does feel like a mini series of adventures, and when you listen to them all in order, which I've recently done, you do get a great sense of payoff when you listen to them, because obviously you get to know Mark as a character, you know, how this TARDIS team works, and when you get to sort of the end of Warzone, you're like, oh my god, this is really serious. And obviously Tegan absolutely shines in Warzone trying to look after Mark, and obviously, you know, it's just a great sort of precursor to the sort of, you know, like I said, it's a story what should have been told on TV, and it's an amazing one. It's a great one by Chris Chapman and Guy Adams. She does a wonderful job bringing those 2 stories to life. So that concludes this video. Hope you have enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next Big Finish review, whatever that will be. So thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.